And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Welcome aboard. I'm National Weather Service meteorologist Peter Chan with your Alaska Marine Weather Outlook on this Tuesday, June 10th, 2025. And starting with the sea ice, still extensive ice along the Beaufort Sea coast east of Utqiagvik through Kaktovik and Demarcation Bay. We do find larger polynyas opening here along the Chukchi Sea coast from off of Wainwright down to off the Lisburn Peninsula, and then more in the way of open water up into the southern end of the Chukchi Sea and the north side of the Bering Strait. As we go further south, though, there's still some remnant ice floating around out there between St. Lawrence and St. Matthew, but we are going to see overall coming up here the rest of this week a broader southerly, somewhat milder flow of air coming in from the North Pacific across the Bering Sea. But when you have that set up, water temperatures are cool, and with that increased moisture, that's going to lead to areas of low stratus, fog, and some areas of rain or rain showers. And we do have a frontal system, a trough that'll be pulling up along the west coast, YK deltas later tonight, early Friday morning. So a bit stronger wind gradient. We'll show you that in the actual marine forecast. And then this low, not especially strong out here in the western Bering, but we do have one that's wrapped up a little more, and that's just going to keep that southerly flow coming across the Aleutians and the south end of the Alaska Peninsula, all along the west coast, up past the Bering Strait and up into the Chukchi Sea. Meanwhile, back here through the Panhandle, off of the Panhandle, lower Gulf, there's a weak low. We're watching a easterly wave that's going to come from east to west on Thursday, and that's going to bring some more areas of rain or rain showers, especially to the northern half of the Panhandle and in through the inner coastal mountains here along the British Columbia coastline. And then back further west in the Bering here, we have this broad, relatively weak low, but ahead of it, ahead of the occluded front, we have southerly flow along the west coast up through the eastern Aleutians and lower Alaska Peninsula. So that's going to just keep a showery, moist pattern continuing. Meanwhile, drying out, building ridge of high pressure Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday. We have much warmer temperatures through the interior. In fact, we're going to see temperatures crossing into the North Slope probably hit 60 or better, and then temperatures in the 80s potentially here in the central eastern interior, including Fairbanks, over the course of the weekend. So this will be some of the warmest early summer weather we've seen so far this year. It's been rather cold spring and occasionally wet, but in the meantime, Wednesday's marine outlook here for the inner channel, south winds 10 knots, 2-foot waves, Lynn Canal. Stevens Passage around Petersburg, look for 15-knot winds at 2 knots, and then westerly winds 15 knots here, 15 to 20 knots here in Dixon Entrance, waves 3 to as high as 6 feet off of Craig there, Prince of Wales Island. And then all along further north along the Gulf Coast in the nearshore waters, within 15 nautical miles of shore, west winds around 10 knots from Port Alexander through Sitka, Cross Sound on up to outside of Yakutat Bay, and swells there just 4 feet or so. Now on Thursday, south winds for Stevens Passage and Lynn Canal at 10 knots, waves a couple of feet, and look for west winds 10 knots there around Ketchikan, Metlakatla, and waves a foot or 2. For the outer coast, generally west winds at 15 knots, swells 4 to 5 feet, though winds may turn offshore once you get up toward Cape Suckling. On Wednesday for the northwestern Gulf, Cook Inlet, we're looking at south-southwest winds 10 to 20 knots down here, especially toward Kennedy Entrance. Prince William Sound, west winds 10 knots, waves a foot or 2, and then for outside of Hinchinbrook Entrance and off the Kenai coast, southwest winds to 15 knots, waves a few feet. Then on Thursday, Prince William Sound, west winds 10 knots, 2-foot waves. Outside of Hinchinbrook Entrance to Kayak Island, west winds of 15 knots, 4-foot waves. And then going down the length of Cook Inlet, we're looking at southwest winds 15 to 20 knots, waves 3 to maybe as high as 5 feet toward Kennedy Entrance and off of Kodiak Island. On Wednesday, Kodiak Island will generally see southwesterly winds 20 knots within Shelikof Strait and on the east side of the island. And then winds are going to turn back more around to the south and southeast, 15 to 20 knots as we trail out along the peninsula. Waves 2 to 4 feet here on the Pacific side, 2-3 feet on the Bering side. For Thursday, winds a bit stronger around Kodiak Island, southwest winds to 25 knots. waves 5 feet Shelikof Strait, as well as on the east side there in the nearshore waters on the east side of Kodiak Island. Winds will generally be south-southwest, 25-30 knots on the North Pacific side. And then southeast winds to 30 knots, especially coming through some of the gaps, going down through the lower half of the peninsula. And on the Bering side, waves 3 to 4 feet. The Aleutians, a broad southerly flow across the Aleutian chain, 20-25 knots. And that will just keep a moist southerly flow of air flowing across that region with some showers. And then strongest winds Thursday, far eastern Aleutians, or I should say eastern Aleutians, 30 to 35 knot winds from the southeast. Those winds try to turn back around more with a westerly component to the southwest or west at 20 knots west of Adak. Now along the southwest coast, Bristol Bay, 15 knot southeast winds on Wednesday. Couple of foot waves, 25 knot winds within Kuskokwim Bay with waves 4 or 5 feet. Now, the strongest winds Wednesday will be along the lower Yukon coast, Etolan Strait, out to St. Matthew. South winds to 25 knots and waves running 5, though as high as 9-10 feet as you get out there toward St. Matthew. And then within that wider expanse of Norton Sound, look for south winds at 20 knots and waves running 3-4 feet. For Thursday, southeast winds to 30 knots, the Pribilof, St. Paul, St. George, as well as within Kuskokwim Bay and St. Matthew. Waves out toward St. Matthew, and the Pribilofs are going to be running 8-10 feet. South wind to 20 knots into Bristol Bay with a couple of foot waves. And then along the lower Yukon coast and Norton Sound, look for southeasterly winds, 15 to 20 knots, though a bit stronger here through the Etolan Strait, to 25 knots with 4 to 5 foot waves. For the Bering Strait on Wednesday, gale force winds of 35 to 40 knots, southeasterly winds coming off the west side of the Seward Peninsula. There is ice in place in areas, but where you have some open water, 6 to 7 foot waves, north side of St. Lawrence on up to the Bering Strait. Winds fall off southerly 25 knots off of Cape Lisburne and then fall off further. Generally southwest winds 10 to 15 knots, Utqiagvik to Kaktovik along the Beaufort Sea coast, with still plenty of ice in place there. And then for Thursday, winds will be east-southeast, Kaktovik through Prudhoe Bay, becoming southerly 15 knots, Utqiagvik down through Point Ley. And then as we come down around the Lisburne Peninsula, winds will be southeasterly 20 to 25 knots out of Kotzebue Sound to north of the Bering Strait, and then south of the Bering Strait along the west side here of the Seward Peninsula to the north side of St. Lawrence Island. On Thursday, we're looking at southeasterly winds of 25 to 30 knots with waves running 4 to 6 feet.